Hello. In this video, we will discuss what GitHub Pages is and how you can use it to host your website online for free. So, GitHub Pages is a service that github.com provides, and per account, you get to host one website for free using the GitHub platform. So, in order to use GitHub Pages and host your code online, you'll need to have a GitHub account created. So, if you don't already have one, create a GitHub account, and when you log in, you should be redirected to your dashboard, which will look something like this. Currently, you may not have any repositories hosted, and that's completely all right. We'll go ahead and create our first repository. So new. At this point, you need to ensure that your repository name is your username, which for in my case is jendicruz22 dot github.io. So nothing capital, no space. So this is what you need to be naming your repository. And because it's your username.github.io and this is what you're calling your repository when you're creating it, later on this will be the name of our website. So I think GitHub Pages does allow you to integrate your own domain, but if not, this is the one that you get by default for free. Then you can go on and add a description. It's optional. A brief description explaining what this repository is, what kind of code it holds. Next, you can decide if you want your repository to be public or private. So public would mean anyone on the internet can see this repository and you can choose who can commit. Private means, which we will select, no one gets to see your code unless you've invited them to your repository. So an invitation would be necessary. Currently, we have a basic website. There's no need to share the code, so I'll keep it private. But if you need any recruiter visiting your profile to be able to see your code, or family or friends, in that case, you may want to keep it public. README is something that you could include in your repository where you can provide a longer description of what your project is, the kind of functionalities you've implemented, the technologies you've used. So that's optional. It's up to you if you'd like to add a README or no. You can't simply write into it using like you usually do with Word. It uses something called Markdown language that you may want to look into in order to have your text appear in a certain way. So there's a way to have your text be bold or italic, create a different heading, and so on. So look into what Markdown language is in order to make your README look beautiful and appealing. We'll leave the rest to be default and hit create repository. Now, the first time you create a repository, it's going to be empty. And in order to add code to it so that we can see it on our website, you need to select Setup in Desktop. In this video, we are using GitHub Desktop to add code to our repository. There are other options as well, as you can see. But for today, we will use GitHub Desktop. Again, if you don't have GitHub Desktop, then you may want to pause this video and install that. Once you have installed it, click on Get Setup in Desktop. Allow it to open GitHub Desktop. And in here, you can see where your code is coming from online and what your local location for this app is going to be. So for me, currently on my desktop, I have a folder called GitHub within which I am going to create this repository. So when you hit clone, an empty folder or a folder with whatever code you have here eventually is what gets created or what gets copied into, and a local copy is then made available. But in order to add some code to it, because it's currently empty, you'll find nothing in it. So we'll have to use a code editor, something like Visual Studio Code, in order to add something to it. So I'm going to go to Desktop, GitHub, my GitHub subfolder, and as you can see, my repository or a folder with the same name as my repository is created here and it's currently empty. So I'm going to select this folder and we'll add some code to it. So click on new file. We'll simply create an index.html file here and just have a basic website structure that we can use to see that our website is actually hosted, and you can always build onto it. So I'm going to name this Introduction to GitHub Pages. And let's add a heading so we can actually see something that's not a blank page. So welcome to my website. Save that. Maybe even have a paragraph with some lorem ipsum in it, which is dummy code, dummy text. You don't need to have this, but why not? Just to see a heading and a paragraph. Save all of your changes. Once you're done adding all of your code, you can close this Visual Studio Code editor and open GitHub Desktop. When you open GitHub Desktop, you'll see that it's saying some change has been made to your local repository, which is you have created a new index.html file. By default, it's going to select all the files that you've made changes to, added, removed, it can be anything. So select all the changes you want to commit, which is select all the changes you want to push to your data, to your repository, and add some comment to it. The first commit is usually written as first commit, but in the future you can write something like added home page or whatever you'd like. For now, I'm just going to write first commit since this is the first time we're adding some code to our repository. Hit commit to main, and then once that's committed, you push this committed package onto your repository. So just to review the steps so far, we have created our GitHub account and installed GitHub Desktop. Once we cloned it, we had a local folder that was created for us. And inside this, we have added our code. This is a local copy of our website. Once this was created, we use GitHub Desktop in order to commit our change and then push it to our repository. And now that it has had some time, if you reload your page, you'll see that index.html has been added. And clicking on this, it's exactly the code that we just edited. So at this point, your GitHub page is ready. You have created a repository with this name. So let's read what the documentation says. What we need to do is search for a website called username.github.io. Simply replace username with your actual GitHub username, which in my case is https://jendecruz22.github.io. Need not be worried that this 404 page is showing because we've just created a repository and committed our changes, so it can take up to 10 to 15 minutes for the website to load. So I'm going to resume recording when that happens. This is sometime later, and as you can see, I've made no changes and my website is available on that specific domain. In case yours is still showing the 404 error after 30 minutes or so, what you can do is go back to your repository, and in here under settings, you have the option of going under code and automation. You can go to pages, and once this page loads, which it eventually will, just make sure you're deploying from a branch, which is, in case it's none, just select main branch and your root folder where your index.html is. Save these changes if you've made any, and give it another 2 minutes and your website should load. This is the setting where you can determine where you want your code to be coming from and what branch it's stored in, and accordingly, once the setting has been set, you can come back to your domain and check it out. And while you're here, you can see that you can, if you have purchased or you have a custom domain, you can add it here and hit save. And then you no longer need to come to your username.github.io. Just give it some time. Once it's processed, you will be able to access this GitHub Pages hosted website using your custom domain. So that's how you can use GitHub Pages in order to host one of your websites linked to your GitHub account for free.